On June 25th, 1950.
The sun was shining brilliantly all over the land of the morning calm. It was Sunday. In Seoul, the capital, the church bells were ringing from corner to corner, blessing the 2 million people with peace and security. The innocent citizens went about, some to amusement centers, and others to the suburbs for the one day's recreation of the week, and still others who were religious went to church. No one ever dreamed that this blessed day was the day when the greatest tragedy of this white-clothed nation would break out at its 38th parallel line. This was another imperialistic program of the Kremlin to furnish the Kim Il-sung puppets arms and ammunition, along with an elaborate blueprint to capture the southern half of this peninsula. The puppet government had long prepared this nefarious invasion according to the blueprint, with the blood and perspiration of the people. They overwhelmed us with enormous quantities of heavy armament. The 38th parallel line was crushed. Seoul was invaded and captured within 3 days. Then comes the first general retreat. Seeking refuge and freedom, thousands and thousands of women and children deserted home and moved to the south to safety in the scorching heat. Then came the second general retreat, following the illegal invasion by the Chinese communists. Again deserting native towns and beloved homes, more men, women, and children evacuated the war zones and moved to the south. This was a tragedy we have never seen before in our history of 5,000 years. These refugees who refused slavery and moved to the south seeking freedom were estimated at 8 million, or 40% of the whole population. Give housing, clothing, and food to these homeless, naked, starving refugees who lost everything they had and who were trembling with uneasiness and fear was one of the biggest tasks of reconstruction for the government. It was a task of equal importance as a military command at the front, and it took exactly the same amount of effort, energy, and materials for reconstruction as it took for the country's defense. Chaos reigned. There was confusion in cities, towns, villages, everywhere. War orphans, old men and women who were isolated through this confusion, little school children who lost their families, pupils gathered together on street corners, in vacant lots, under trees, and on the top of wooded hills. The miseries of these early days of refugee life was a pathetic sight. And it took the military and charitable assistance, along with the spiritual aid of these friendly and free United Nations, that made it possible for these refugees to emerge from the fear and uneasiness of the critical situation of early days of this refugee life, to find in themselves hope for the future of their country. When the North Korean communists started the invasion, the United Nations did not lose time in sending guns and ammunition against the invaders. In June 1950, according to the decision of the Security Council of the United Nations, the police action of these United Nations began to operate in force. They started to repulse the aggressors, and at the same time, enormous quantities of food and other necessities were unloaded at each port of South Korea. The food, clothes, medical supplies, and all types of materials for use in this emergency were unloaded. Several assistant teams of the United Nations were set up with their headquarters at Busan, and numerous local teams in each province started to operate at full power. Meanwhile, the government of the Republic of Korea organized a Central Relief Committee with its headquarters in Busan and its branches in each province, city, county, and village. The Central Relief Committee consists of the chiefs of the Civil Assistance Corps and the ministers of Social Affairs, Internal Affairs, National Defense, Agriculture and Forestry, Commerce and Industry, Finance, Welfare, Transportation, and Foreign Materials. It holds its regular meeting every week. In this meeting are discussed and carried out the problems of the kinds of relief materials needed, and proper transport and proper distribution of these items. The Minister of Social Affairs has had the leadership in carrying out these relief activities. He organized relief teams for various relief activities. During the retreat days, when people could not afford to take care of their own sanitation, or where there were too many refugees crowded in any place they could find, diseases were taking a frightful toll. But DDT spray and vaccinations protected the refugees from contagious diseases. Many who were suffering from sicknesses were treated. This was one of the most important relief programs, and the Welfare Ministry accomplished it. Most of the refugees who were on the way to the south were given enough food to meet their basic needs. In large towns and districts where there were a large number of refugees, there were distributed milk porridge for the sick people and old men and children who were malnutritious. 7,200,000 pounds of milk powder are required annually for their purpose, and it is still distributed today. A total number of 6 million people have been fed at 27 places of distribution. War orphans whose parents were killed by communists number an estimated 100,000, and it is one of the most important tasks for the future of the nation to protect these orphans. But most of the infant homes and orphanages were destroyed by the war, and those which were able to move to the south were short of materials. Approximately 30,000 orphans are in the 291 orphanages in South Korea. But the rest of these 70,000 orphans are still wandering about the towns and villages in rags and with ration cans in hand. Urgent action is required to protect these infants who will someday be the pillars on whose shoulders will rest the future of their country. children were not the only group in need of help. There are many solitary old men. Helpless old people were accommodated in homes for old people. And food, clothes, and bedding were given from the UN relief materials. These old people are using the traditional craft, skills of their ancient people, to make beautiful tapestries, carpets, pottery, and glassware. Among these refugees who require relief are the ones who evacuated from the guerrilla zones, forced to flee by the fortunes of war. Out of these refugees, those who require relief and protection are estimated at more than 4,600,000. Even the basic necessities required by these people amount to a staggering total. Some of the most important articles for this purpose, for example, are more than 460,000 tons of rice, more than 640 million yards of cotton cloth, more than 2,100,000 blankets, 1,000 tents, 700 tons of raw rubber, 540 million pounds of raw cotton, 7,200,000 pounds of milk powder. We express our thanks to the United Nations for these relief materials, brought in addition to a vast quantity of war materials. The activities and efforts of all teams of the Relief Committee, central and provincial, were a great factor in the distribution of these relief materials. They are exclusively responsible for the transport and distribution of these articles to remote islands and mountainous districts. These refugees are not well fed, but a livable diet was again available. They are not warm and comfortable, but they aren't frozen. They are relieved enough to be able to look forward to the day when they live a new and fuller life. The early days of this refugee is now a remote reminiscence. Multitude of materials and equipment were sent. Grains, flour, salt, sugar, clothes, blankets, cloth, shoes, soap, needles, thread. All these are daily necessities. Raw materials such as raw cotton and coal, and reconstruction materials for communication, transportation, and architecture. All these were sent to Korea. Now the fear of hunger and uneasiness of life in the early days of the war are relieved. The social order is maintained. Transportation and communication facilities are being replaced. Education has been returned to its proper place in the life of the people. Look at these children. Who could imagine that These are the same orphans that you found on the street, dying of cold and hunger a year ago. They are now as well fed and as well educated as those who have had their own parents to take care of them. Toys, books, and clothes were also sent by the children of our friendly nations. They give the children of this land an exceptional joy as well as spiritual comfort and health. These children, side by side with United Nations soldiers, get together to worship and to thank God and pray God to give them blessings, both to themselves and to those who help them. And they promise Him to be good and to grow strong and to become powerful Christian soldiers of tomorrow for the peace of the world in the years to come. There are more than 1,500 refugee camps on the islands and mainland of South Korea. The total number of refugees in these protection camps is 3,400,000. Their living conditions are much improved in comparison with the early days of the war. Inside of these barracks are the peace and comfort of homes. A great many of people leave these camps after they have found jobs to support themselves, to make room for others. There are old people who are not capable of work, and these people live in the camps in peace and quiet with the help of relief materials and the warm sympathies of our friendly neighbors. However, there's a limit to the relief budgets the United Nations command. The Relief Committee made it a policy to find jobs for those who can work. Such jobs as repairing the roads and the bridges, building barracks, and other reconstruction work by which they can support themselves. The government is making a 5-year plan to build 600,000 welfare homes of several different types, adapted for both city and country life. This is just one of the reconstruction programs. The United Nations is sending lumber, nails, and cement. This system will encourage homeless war orphans in their desire for reconstruction and will improve their hope for the future. In the first year, more than 10,000 welfare houses were completed. The Relief Committee, who is in charge of relief activities, is always with the refugees. They visit these people to console and encourage them while supervising fair distribution of relief items. The national welfare is improving day by day, and the UN help is mainly responsible for this improvement. Medical supplies are one of the most important relief materials. Anti-epidemic activities and a universal vaccination program succeeded in preventing a great number of contagious diseases. Reconstruction of larger hospitals, establishment of charity hospitals on the part of the religious communities relieve the sick and improve the national welfare standard. Another important task of the relief programs is to protect wounded veterans and their bereaved families. The government passed laws to protect them and to support these families, and is now carrying out its program. 10 veterans' homes are now being built for each province. Labor offices are being set up in towns of 100,000 population or more, which will find jobs for veterans or lend capital for free enterprise. Artificial hands and legs for wounded veterans will be manufactured. There is a technical school for war veterans and their families where they can learn typing, stenography, carpentry, barbering, husbandry, art, tailoring, and knitting. There are no personal expenses at all for those in these schools. Expenses for housing, clothing, food, and books are paid by the government. This is, however, a problem which is growing more serious and urgent. The government aid alone is not sufficient. Each one of the nations is encouraged to realize the seriousness of this problem and to help. It is horrible to think of the loss caused by this war. Several 100,000 dead and wounded, millions of refugees, more than $2 billion in culture and riches. Was all this lost in vain? Will we ever have the unification which we are so bitterly fighting for? Even now we have not lost our patience and courage for the cause. We have to continue the war, and we have to continue reconstruction work. The great cause the United Nations took up in waging this war against communism will never cease. And the United Nations assistance for the reconstruction of this country will not stop, neither will it be forgotten. To rebuild all the establishments, to reconstruct all the industrial plants, and to crush the communist invasion, this is the only way for us to accomplish our goal and to show our gratitude to the United Nations. having greater courage for the reconstruction, we will rally the energy of every one of us for victory. In conclusion, we are increasingly grateful to the United Nations, and we pray to God for His help and His blessing in the great cause that we are fighting for. And we know that with His help and with the aid of all free men, our freedom will never end.